take it this is your first honeymoon?
Yes. I mean, it would be if it were.
I think making a movie is a vacation. I always call that my vacation. It is absolutely no work at all. To get up in the morning is not difficult. Then you are taken care of. And all they ask of you is to get up there and say a couple of lines. There were so many restrictions. I don't know how they ever could make as good movies as they were.
I'm sorry to intrude on this tender scene.
I knew her before you did, loved her before you did. I wasn't as lucky as you.
Ingrid Bergman's 7-year contract with David Selznick came to an end. During that time, she took parts like the nun in The Bells of St. Mary's. People responded to her performance with total belief. My mother then became set on playing a saint.
I think she identified, to a certain extent, to Joan of Arc. Not because she felt she was a saint, but because this was a 14-year-old kid from the country that became a warrior and fought for France against the English. And I think that kind of call that Joan of Arc had was the same kind of call that Mother wrote in a diary when she was 12. I have to keep a record of this great life that is ahead of me, because I'm going to be one of the most important stars.
Naturally, as a man wants to play Hamlet, a woman wants to play Joan of Arc. And when I was a child, I must have read about her in school. And then I started to collect medals and things. And I waited and talked to many people, and no one was interested. And one day I got a telephone call from Maxwell Anderson. He said, I would like to have you for a play about Joan of Arc. And I said, that's it, you don't even have to ask more, I'm coming.
The success of Joan of Lorraine on Broadway enabled my mother to make the film Joan of Arc, the story of the French farm girl who followed her inner voices, even though it meant death. My mother not only put her money into the picture, but also her whole heart.
Bergman, beautiful, bewitching, breathtaking.
God has spoken to me through his messengers. And it is his will that I come to aid you and that you be king of France.
Don't trust her, my lord.
I'm trying not to trust her, but every time I look into her eyes, I believe what she says is true.
We did the absolute honest version that we could find. And with all the combings of hair, I think it should have been rough. Everybody came up and smoothed you out, and it was very glossy. Even the battle scenes, they are beautiful, but not in the right sense.
In God's name, strike! Strike boldly!
And the censorship was so hard on us that you couldn't do anything that was really down to earth.
My mother was deeply disappointed in the reception to Joan of Arc, as well as to some other movies she made in those years. She was becoming disillusioned with Hollywood, and her marriage to my father had become strained. This is when she first saw the work of Italian filmmaker Roberto Rossellini.
I happened to see a picture called Rome Open City, and it so struck me, it so moved me. It was the real feeling, and the people were real. And that wonderful human feeling came across the screen that was hard to find. I didn't think Mr. Rossellini would ever get enough courage to write to me, because I was in those days very high on top of the box office. He wouldn't possibly get the idea that I would like to come to Italy and make one of his little pictures, for very little money. So I had to tell him that, and I didn't know how to do it except write a letter.
My mother had left home many times for other roles. Why should this be any different? But this time it would be years before she would return. Again, I remained with my father, who was then a neurosurgeon in Los Angeles. I was 10 years old. Ingrid Bergman arrived in Italy in 1949 to make a picture directed by Roberto Rossellini called Stromboli. But the movie itself paled into insignificance compared to the world scandal that would soon break.
We had a story outline, and then the dialogue was always written as we went along. My leading man was a fisherman, and he thought he was going to work in the crew. He had no idea that he was going to become my leading man. Mr. Rossellini didn't like actors, and he wanted real people. I said, all the close-ups has to be from this side. And he said, are you out of your mind? I shoot my picture the way it suits me. I don't care which side of the face it's going to be on. And from then on, I threw it out of my mind.
And I think besides the great filmmaker, she discovered this great, generous man. And Mother has always been a little bit of a scared creature. She was always very shy and a little bit scared of people, and a little bit afraid of authority. She was very independent, but she, like a child, like a child who would stand her ground but would not fight back. And Father came with this immense generosity, immense lightness. The world was out there for him to enjoy. And I think she came from a Swedish background that taught her the world is out there for you to obey, to bow, to be respectful. My father never thought of that. In fact, it was even considered unrespectful. Not that I consider him unrespectful, but there were no rules for him. It was life, I thought he brought her so much optimism, so much vitality, and a great sense of adventure.
But it was a marvelous way of getting away from everything that I wanted to get away from, and that was all the ease. Here was nothing that was easy. In Hollywood in those days was like a dream. If you wanted pink elephants, you'd get pink elephants, or you get trained flies or anything. Call up and we get them for tomorrow. And all the talent was there, and an enormous amount of people in the crew, and I was very spoiled, which was the complete difference when you came to Italy and you did everything yourself, and in a very, very hard way. But that is what I wanted, and I got what I wanted.
In 1949, my mother fell in love with my dad, and she was married still to Peter. That created an enormous scandal, and then to make it worse, a few months later she got pregnant. She wasn't married, and she wasn't even divorced from Peter. That created a scandal that was of epic dimension.
I certainly thought that there would be some write-ups in the paper that I wanted a divorce, but I certainly didn't expect for months and years to be headlines and on the first page.
When she had a child with Roberto Rossellini and she wasn't married to him, why it was such a scandal and disaster. If it had been one of the actresses maybe who'd always played the bad girl, they would have said that's right in character. Because Ingrid Bergman was so convincing on screen as virtuous, submissive, and self-sacrificing, her off-screen behavior was a shock. Her former admirers felt duped and betrayed.
So many people tried to tell me that it was their enormous love for me, that their love turned to hatred, because my image was the good, wonderful woman who had played, but they forgot that played, a saint and a nun. They forgot that I was a woman, and maybe not at all what I did on the screen.
My mother stayed on in Italy with Roberto Rossellini after she made Stromboli. She was denounced in Congress by a United States senator who declared her persona non grata. My father and I lived in California with the enormous public outcry. After strange legal maneuverings, my mother received a Mexican divorce and a Mexican marriage, with stand-ins acting for herself and Roberto Rossellini. My father won custody of me in Los Angeles, with my cooperation. He was desperate. I felt I was all he had left.